The invitations were printed on heavy cream cardstock with gold foil lettering, marking 40 years of a legacy I had built with my own hands. 40 years of sweat, sacrifice, and endless quiet compromise. But when I handed the very first invitation to my daughter, she didn't even look at it. She pushed it back across the marble countertop, her voice completely detached, and said her in-laws were hosting a last-minute weekend barbecue at their lake house, and that she simply couldn't miss it. She looked me in the eye and chose a casual afternoon of grilled hot dogs with people who had spent 5 years treating her like a second-class citizen over the biggest milestone of my life. My heart shattered, but I didn't scream, and I didn't beg. Instead, I picked up my pen, crossed her name off the head table, and made a single phone call to someone her husband's family had been trying to erase for over a decade. My name is Evelyn. I'm 38 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've poured every drop of my sweat, ambition, and soul into running my late parents' legacy enterprise. This month marked our 40-year milestone, an achievement built on decades of quiet sacrifice. To celebrate, I organized a grand gala, a tribute to where we started and where we were going. Naturally, the very first invitation was reserved for my 20-year-old daughter, Chloe. I set the heavy cream cardstock, finished with gold foil, onto the marble kitchen island between us. But Chloe didn't even pick it up. She barely glanced at the lettering before pushing it back toward me. In a cold, detached voice, she explained that her husband's parents were hosting an impromptu weekend barbecue at their lake house, and she simply couldn't miss it. She looked me dead in the eye and chose grilled hot dogs with people who spent 5 years treating her like an outsider over the single most important night of my career. This wasn't the first time the Carter family had made it clear where I stood. From the moment Chloe married Julian, his parents looked down their noses at us. Despite the thriving empire my family had built over 40 years, the Carters viewed me as nothing more than crude, self-made new money that didn't belong in their high society circles. They snubbed my invitations, made passive-aggressive comments about my background, and worst of all, spent 5 years subtly belittling Chloe. They treated my daughter like a second-class citizen, constantly reminding her that she was lucky to marry into their prestigious bloodline. But what broke my heart wasn't just their arrogance. It was watching Chloe bend over backward, desperately shrinking herself to earn the approval of a mother-in-law who would never truly accept her. She was throwing away her own self-respect to appease people who treated her like an afterthought. Sitting alone at my kitchen counter, looking at that rejected invitation, I realized I couldn't keep quietly watching my daughter destroy her dignity. Instead of shedding another tear or begging Chloe to change her mind, a strange, cold clarity washed over me. I took a deep breath, picked up my pen, and slowly drew a single line through her name on the head table seating chart. I had 2 prime VIP seats left open, and I refused to let them go to waste on people who couldn't appreciate the sacrifice it took to build my legacy. Instead, I unlocked my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. I reached out to Richard Carter, Julian's estranged, quietly powerful uncle. 12 years ago, the Carter family had ruthlessly ousted Richard from their shared family enterprise, stealing his majority shares and erasing his name from their corporate history to satisfy their own greed. Since then, he had built a quiet, massive empire of his own in another state. When Richard answered, his voice was calm and steady. I laid out the situation plainly and extended an invitation to sit beside me at the gala's head table. He listened in silence, chuckled softly, and accepted. The night of the 40-year gala arrived, transforming the grand ballroom of the city's finest hotel into a sea of crystal chandeliers, orchestral music, and black-tie elegance. Over 300 prominent business leaders filled the room, celebrating the legacy my parents started and that I had expanded. Right at my side sat Richard Carter, looking impeccably distinguished and exuding a quiet, commanding authority. Midway through the opening champagne toast, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. I glanced up and saw them. Chloe, Julian, and his parents, Victoria and Arthur Carter, strutted into the room over an hour late. Victoria wore a smug, condescending smile, clearly assuming they could waltz in whenever they pleased, make a brief, dramatic appearance, and siphon off the prestige of my high-profile event for their own social clout. They expected me to be desperate for their presence, eagerly rushing over to welcome them after being discarded. They had no idea that I had personally arranged their late arrival to drop them right into the back corner of the room. As the ushers guided them through the crowded ballroom, Victoria's confident stride faltered. The smug smile vanished from her face as they were led past the gleaming centerpiece tables and seated at a small, basic table in the far back corner near the kitchen doors. I watched from the elevated dais as Arthur adjusted his collar, clearly offended by the placement. Chloe looked around nervously, her eyes searching for mine, realizing for the first time that her actions had consequences. Then, Arthur's eyes drifted toward the head table. I watched the exact moment his gaze landed on the distinguished man sitting directly to my right. Arthur froze, his glass of water slipping slightly in his hand. Victoria turned to see what her husband was staring at, and the color drained completely from her face. Richard raised his glass in a calm, deliberate silent toast. The Carters were paralyzed with shock, recognizing the brother they had betrayed and ruined years ago, now sitting as my guest of honor, holding the precise legal and financial leverage that could dismantle their entire business. The murmuring ballroom fell silent as I stepped up to the crystal podium, the spotlight warm against my face. Looking out at the sea of guests, my eyes briefly met Chloe's wide, anxious gaze before I looked past her to Arthur and Victoria, who were sitting rigid in their seats. I didn't shout, nor did I voice anger. Instead, I spoke about the true meaning of legacy, hard work, and the irreplaceable value of genuine loyalty over hollow social status. Then I announced the highlight of the evening. I revealed that our company was officially entering a groundbreaking joint venture, backed by a massive capital investment from none other than Richard Carter. Gasps rippled through the room. Victoria's mouth dropped open in complete horror as she realized that the man they had cast aside was now partnering with the woman they had looked down upon. With a single strategic move, the financial power shifted entirely away from them. The Carters sat humiliated, trapped in the back of the room, realizing they had lost control of their narrative. After the speeches concluded, the ballroom burst into applause, but the Carters hastily slipped out through the side doors, unable to bear the shame. Chloe stayed behind, approaching me with tears streaming down her face. For the first time, she saw the Carters for who they truly were, users who had manipulated her loyalty to feed their own arrogance. She apologized, begging for forgiveness, realizing how close she had come to throwing away her family for people who never respected her. I held her, but I made my boundaries crystal clear. Respect is earned, not given up for cheap approval. I took back my seat at the head table, secure in my legacy, my choices, and my future. What would you do if your child chose disrespectful in-laws over your biggest life milestone? Would you forgive them, or teach them a lesson like I did? Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.